All right, I think we can just go ahead and get started, and any more people that come in, we will just let them in little by little. But without further ado, I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to the Pacificas in Medicine, our little conference series, Rooted in Medicine. Our theme today will be where Mana meets mental health. We're so excited to have all you guys here and to be part of these conferences. We put these conferences together, and we're hoping to, to keep them going, to help people network, to help people see different leadership in regards to different Polynesians and leaders in different kinds of fields all around medicine and health, and also just to give our communities any support in any way that we can, and maybe link you guys to people who may be able to help in whatever ways they can. We're super excited for today in our topic in regards to mental health. With these three doctors here in psychiatry and psychology, and I know these three personally, and I can't, I don't have enough words to describe how meaningful they have been to me and my progress and my mental health, and just the big leaders that they are in the community. So in regards to mental health, I don't think we have better experts than these three. So I'm grateful for them to share their words and to talk about in regards to mental health and the Polynesian community specifically. I'm grateful for all of you guys. We received a lot of questions and a lot of feedback in regards to what you guys want to hear and different topics that you guys are curious about. So I hope that this conference is beneficial to you. Before anything, I do want to just introduce our speakers, and then we can just go ahead and have these speakers share what they want to feel, share what they feel they want to share. And then afterwards, I do want you guys to know that I just want to leave it as kind of like an open discussion, open format kind of conference. And following these three speakers, if you guys want to ask questions, or if you have any further questions or want to know more about them, please feel free to unmute or to put it in the chat. We will be watching the chats and we will have them answer your questions. Our first speaker today will be Bongo Gansinia. He was born and raised in Honoka'a, a small sugarcane plantation town on the Big Island of Hawaii. He grew up playing basketball and football. He and his partner are the parents of three energetic boys. During his free time, he enjoys playing music, fishing, cooking, camping, and spending time with his family. He has a Filipino and Hanai Hawaiian ancestry. Bongo comes from a line of healers and orators. Bongo is the youngest of three children and a first-generation student. He completed his Bachelor in Arts in Psychology at the University of Hawaii in Hilo, then his Master's in Community Counseling from Washington State University. He recently obtained his PhD in Counseling Psychology from BYU Provo. Clinically, Bongo has been doing mental health work for 9 years in counseling. He enjoys conducting individual, family, and group therapy. His primary research interests include multicultural psychology, Pasifika mental health, humor in therapy, and help-seeking stigma. For our second speaker, Hoku Conklin is a professor and an associate clinical professor at BYU Provo. He grew up in Southern California, and has also lived abroad in New Zealand and Australia. He identifies as Polynesian and is of Maori and Hawaiian background. He completed his undergraduate studies in psychology at BYU Hawaii and his PhD in counseling psychology from BYU Provo. He completed a pre-doctoral internship at the University of Utah Counseling Center, a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of California, San Diego Counseling and Psychological Services, and is currently a licensed psychologist practicing individual, group, and couples counseling in BYU Counseling and Psychological Services. Professor Conklin has a strong interest in multicultural counseling and research. And for our third speaker, Dr. Lyle Milton Kinikini is a psychiatrist who is currently contracted as one of the staff psychiatrists for the Snake River Correctional Institute. This institute is one of Oregon's largest prisons with a total of 4,500 inmates. And for the last 10 years, Dr. Kinikini has helped to oversee the psychotropic medications for almost 1,500 of these patients at this institution. Lyle is of Tongan descent with family who immigrated to the US from the islands of Ha'apai and Tongatapu and Tonga. His father hails from the small village of Uiha, while his mother has family from Fatai, Nukunuku, and Matahao and Tongatapu. In May of 1990, Lyle married his wife for 31 years now while they were at school. His wife, Linda Vea Kinikimi, is also of Tongan descent with immigrant parents who hail from Pelemea, Papai, and Fo'ui Tongatapu. Lyle and Linda have 8 children and 5 grandchildren. Lyle and his wife, Linda, acquired their bachelor's degrees in sociology in 1995 from BYU Provo. At that time, they had 2 children with 1 on the way. Lyle continued his education at the University of Utah in preparation for the MCAT. And then a few years later, he was accepted to the University of Utah Medical School in 1998. At that time, they had 4 children. Lyle would graduate from medical school in 2002 with 6 children, and some years later was accepted to UCLA's psychiatry residency program in Bakersfield, California, with 7 children and 1 on the way. Lyle's increased educational and professional pursuits have been marked by and inspired by his growing family. His career and his family have not only been his greatest investments, but they have also been his greatest achievements. Professionally, Lyle has worked in multiple settings, from private practice to outpatient treatment in the community to state mental hospitals. Although Lyle has worked with youth, adults, and geriatric patients, most of his expertise and work has been in the area of adult mental health and working in correctional facilities, including state prisons for California, Utah, and currently Oregon. His work serves a population often overlooked. I'm very grateful to welcome these guys, and I just want to turn the time over to Bongo. So thank you guys, and we will continue to hear from them.
Thank you, and aloha, everyone. I just want to acknowledge how humbled I feel to be a part of this process and to share this space with 2 professionals that I, as I'm getting to know, adore. And I want to start off in this space to do a land acknowledgement. I think it's important as people of the Pacific as we acknowledge the land that we are on, and I'm currently on the land of Utah right now. And I acknowledge in this land the Ute tribe, and that this is their traditional homelands. For the Goshu, the Shoshone, the Paiute, recognize that this land has indigenous ties to these people, and that this territory was taken from them. And now we benefit from that. And I benefit from that. And I recognize the sovereign relationships that these individuals have with their tribal governments, and that there's approximately 60,000 Americans here, natives here, and their tribes are here, although they may not be as present as others who are here. And I start with this with the intent to set the tone for why it's important for us to have mental health as a discussion. All of us indigenous people, whether we identify as indigenous or not, or Pasifika, have had multiple levels of trauma. And this trauma can be in many different forms. The displacement of land, the discussion and the stopping of us using our languages. Inherently in the fact that we're speaking English actually right now shows that we are a colonized people. And that many of us come from generations of individuals who have left the homeland and have in some ways gone through the trauma of coming to a new country, being in a new land, learning a new language. And so I want to acknowledge that as Pasifika in the helping fields and in the community, if we really take a closer look, we all our lives have been laced with trauma. And that without acknowledging the land that I stand on and I sit on, better said, I would fail to acknowledge the experience of these indigenous peoples of Utah. And I would fail to acknowledge us as peoples of a land and of ocean. And with that, I would like to also introduce myself of kind of where I stand. And I appreciate Luti really giving that beautiful introduction about me, but I think it's important for you to hear that my mountain is Mauna Kea, that my river is Hi'ilave, that I come from people who, even at this day, are told that they don't belong. I come from a line of healers who do lomi lomi, or in other cultural contexts, fofo, massage. And I also come from a line of healers who do lau lapa'au, or herbal medicines. And in my Filipino line, albolarios, or witch doctors, as they're called. And I've been blessed to have this heritage in my life to really guide me in becoming who I am today. As I was listening to that introduction, I thought to myself, I kind of didn't deserve any of that. And I'm going to refer to some of the questions that some of you all have kind of given earlier ahead of time. We were able to kind of take a peek at that. And I'm hoping tonight, as I get into this, that you can feel that you're not alone in this process. And I'm assuming there are med students and others in the journey of education where we are navigating a Western system with Western standards, and we were raised in a Pasifika system with Pasifika standards. I want to name that these two worlds are inherently different, that the standards of healing are inherently different, and why I acknowledge the land and the connection I have to the land is to acknowledge what I need as part of my healing. You see, we as Pasifika believe in this process of acknowledging the land, that if we know our relationship to our land, our kupuna, our elders, our ancestry, that is part of the healing based on my knowledge set. And I cannot speak for on behalf of all Pasifika peoples, but the frameworks that I do know and the kupuna and the elders who have taught me have really focused on that. And so the question is, we as colonized people, we as people who maybe have been gentrified and have been hurt in this transition of not being able to speak our language, not being able to live in our land, not being able to express ourselves. What do we do with this healing? How do we even start? In first glance, looking at me, you'll see that I kind of have some wild hair right now. And you can imagine, for those who are in the Utah context, one, I stick out because I'm brown. Two, I stick out because my hair is sticking out. And I've intentionally done this as a part of my journey of healing, to recognize and acknowledge my cultural practices from both my lines, my Kanaka line and my Filipino lines. That we as Pasifika believe that the head, po'o, this is the highest part of our body and the most sacred part of our body. And as such, we protect it. We honor it because it is the closest to our ancestors and it is the closest to our God, in whatever you believe that is for you. And for me to be healed, I need to align in that way. Now, many of you are thinking, oh, this guy has a PhD and he's talking about his head and his hair being the healing. These are the things that I never heard in the classroom, but I heard from my kupuna. And in some ways, with the limited amount of time that I have, I want to talk about what my kupuna, my ancestors have taught me. And I'll let the kind of book part of Western modes of therapy, which is largely representative in the literature and in research, speak for itself. Because I want to center our people and I want to center our experience in this. And in that sense, where to start, my answer would be is for us to align. Align our po'o, our head, to the heavens. And the heavens, not necessarily naming a God, but the heavens naming our ancestors, who I know walk beside us, even if they're not in this physical realm, who I've had visitation from, and who have encouraged me in the times where I felt like my mental health wasn't a priority, and where I felt like I wasn't good enough because I was in a Western system made for Western people, and I was raised in a Pasifika context with Pasifika values that inherently oppose each other. And I felt stuck. And so I would invite each of us to consider in this sense. Where is our po'o? Where does our head lead? For where the head goes, the rest of the body follows. And it's important to recognize that connection to ancestors and physically really teaches us the first start of healing in the Pasifika context. The next connection point is the opu, or the stomach area, which we know to be piko-o. And piko, and I failed to mention this with the head, piko really means belly button, or the area where the mother's, I'm going to butcher this now, umbilical cord feeds the child. And we believe as Kanaka that there are three picos. We are fed by our pico on the top to our ancestors. We are fed by our pico right above our navel area with the relationships that we have. And we are also fed with the pico that's on the genitals, which give us the connection to those who come after. Now, I'm not here to debate whether we believe it or not. I'm just here to present the information in terms of how healing in the context of Pasifika mental health, specifically Hawaiian ways of knowing, really teaches the idea that all of these things are connected to relationships. And as relational beings who have a relationship with our aina, or our land, and a relationship to our own bodies and to others with the piko-o, healing comes from that. And so we can question ourselves, how have we engaged with our body and engaged with others in terms of healing? How do we engage and perceive ourselves in terms of our connection to those who come after? And in this sense, we navigate all of this in families who have in some way adopted the Western idea of what healing is. Go take a pill and feel better. And I think that is helpful in some contexts, but it doesn't solve everything. Because if that was the case, I'd be healed with all the Pizza Hut that I eat, right? That's not the case, right? To just eat something and to be healed. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge in this space that we as a colonized people inherited this system, that traditionally, at least in the Hawaiian context that I come from, that we had our healers, right? Our healers who were respected and carried on cultural practices. And with the adaptation and the wars that went on in each of the Pasifika people's realms, those people were displaced and replaced with religious leaders and with Western medicine. And I think it's important to name. And this is why it's not a discussion in our circles in terms of what healing is. Because if all we know is all we've inherited, therefore that's all we can engage with. We cannot ask the questions that we do not know. And so I start in this way and I sit in this space because I'm still an infant in this process. In some ways, I've had to navigate this education of mental health with one foot in the Western world and one foot trying to grasp of whatever I have from my kupuna. And I can tell you it's hard. And I've had multiple experiences working with Pasifika to know that I'm not doing this alone. Without disclosing much, I would like to share a small case presentation with you all related to how these picos have been healing in the work that I've done. I worked with an individual in a place that I worked at prior to where I'm at here. And this individual came in reporting to me having difficulty sleeping, having difficulty eating, using substances in a way that they were not pleased with, and recognizing the health effects of those substances, and came in feeling like they were not good enough for anything. As we explored each of these picos, connection to kupuna ancestor, connection with self piko-o and to body, and connection to land, and as well as connection to those who come after, we sat in a space together, recognizing that this individual had adopted the Western standard of happiness. known as capitalism. If I can get enough money to be happy enough, then I can be enough, and then I can be worth it. But as we work together in reconnecting those picos, this individual began to change. Change because of the connection he felt to his own body and recognizing that happiness doesn't come from purchasing or connecting through physical means, but connecting through oneself. Happy because he felt connected to those who he's withdrawn from, because he thought that he wasn't good enough for them. Happiness because he didn't feel guilty that he wasn't good enough for those who he would want to bring into this physical realm. And most importantly, happy because he felt the connection with ancestors who he thought he would never see again. I know that our kupuna, our tupuna, whatever word you want to use, are with us. They watch over us, and they know because they've experienced the traumas that we've experienced, because we've inherited it from them. And there's quite a bit of research related to generational trauma, historical trauma that can speak to this. They know, they watch us. And I invite each of us to consider, how can I reconnect my piko with my kupuna, with myself and my body, with the land as I'm able to do so, and to live in a way that we not only feel those of the past and those in the present, but to have the privilege to be visited by those who come soon. What a humbling way to think about it. And I want to end with this challenge for each of us. If you're thinking about therapy and flirting with the idea about doing it, I think it's time to seek it out. I'll stop it there and turn the time over to Hoku, and we'll go from there. Brother Hoku.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko ngā pui te iwi, ko tema huruhure te hapu, ko waima te aua, ko whakatere mana wakaiaia te maunga, ko ngā toki mata whaurua te waka, ko nuku tāwhiti te tangata, ko tuirangi taku marae. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Aloha everyone, kia ora, and welcome. I want to give my thanks to Luti for the invitation to join with you this morning. And he's been a good friend of mine for going back several years now, and really proud of him and what he's doing in pursuing his medical school and for the difference that he'll be able to make in our communities. And it's also just a privilege to be able to speak with Dr. Gansinia and also Dr. Kinikini. I've also had a close relationship with Dr. Gansinia for many years now, and while he was a trainee and I was a professor at BYU, I feel like I've learned and grown through so much from my acquaintance and time with him. And to Brother Kinikini, to Dr. Kinikini, we attend the church congregation together, and I feel like I've learned so much from him through that association too. I wanted to begin with the Pepeha and also say thank you to Bongo for that land acknowledgement. I also currently reside in Springville, Utah, and I want to recognize the ancestral homelands and those who are from this area where I live now. And in my Māori tradition too, we also, when we introduce ourselves, we share a waiata or a song. And so I'll share a waiata with you all. And I think so. This particular waiata is kind of related to, I think, the theme that I also want to speak on and share today, related to mental health. Um, and I'll share a little bit more about what this particular song or waiata means. Tatai whakapapae, tatai tora tipuna, tora hono tangata, tora here whenua, e here nei aue, iaku matua tipuna, e here nei ahau, ki toku tatai whakapapae, tipu I roto I te pū, oku ananga, toku whare kōrero, toku whare tipuna, e here nei aue, iaku kohina kōrero, e here nei ahau, ki toku huinga mataranga ki toku tatai whakapapae. I wanted to share this particular waiata because it speaks about whakapapa, which has to do with our ancestry, our genealogy, and how our genealogy connects us to our ancestors. It connects us to the people around us. It connects us to our ancestral homeland. It connects us to ancestral knowledge. And I wanted to kind of share some of my comments around that particularly. And I was just reflecting on kind of mental health generally and maybe what I'd like to share, but particularly related to our Pasifika people. I feel like we come from a very rich heritage and that there's, through those lines, healing traditions, there's oral traditions, and just so many things that can be a very rich part of our lives. And I also want to consider that in the context of, I grew up in California and San Diego, and so in many ways I felt kind of removed from a lot of that growing up. And with the way that I think about healing in general as a psychologist is that I think of it in terms of, and the way that I think about health and wellness is in terms of the connections we feel. And that's to a lot of these things that certainly I talked about, but there are many connections that I think kind of hold us up and that are associated with health and well-being. For me, faith is a big part of that. The connection to Kiakua, to the God whom I know and love, and the connection to also to the people in my life. My wife, Finau, so we met at BYU in Hawaii, and she's from Fiji, and works here in the area as a social worker. And I've learned so much through her about the connections from where she comes from, and how those connections can kind of be nurtured through different cultural contexts, whether that be through traditional like Ava ceremonies, or through song, through Waiata, through just various traditions, that these can be sources of healing. And oftentimes, I guess, in the work that I do as a psychologist, is that I feel that a lot of students whom I meet with, that a lot of those connections feel cut. And sometimes that might be like, I feel like I'm not doing as well as I should be doing in school, or I don't feel like I'm worth putting myself out there and letting people get to know me. And so I don't let people get close, or I don't feel connected to my family because I'm not sure I can trust, or and on and on. And so I see so much of healing, and the work that I do as a psychologist is kind of helping to restore some of those connections. And I'm mindful to, just thinking of our Pasifika communities in particular, is that it can be really difficult. I really appreciate what Dr. Gancinia mentioned about colonization, because sometimes we can identify as Polynesian, and yet within our Pasifika communities not feel like I'm a part of that. And so in some ways it might feel like those connections are kind of severed. But I just wanted to kind of begin with that. I didn't prepare a great deal. I'm especially interested in hoping that this can be more of a conversation, and I'm really excited for the questions that have kind of been brought up. And but with that, I want to thank you for joining with us this evening, and I'll turn the time to Dr. Kinikini.
All right. Man, I first wanted to say I'm just so humbled and honored that Luthi asked me, especially to participate, but especially after listening to the other doctors. Honestly, I'm so excited and grateful that, Dr. Conklin mentioned he and I have a relationship and that we go to the same congregation. But I'm so grateful to be connected with Dr. Gancinia now. Where were you 30 years ago? Because, it just, everything you said just resonated with me so much. I mean, I'm clearly a product of course, I'm full Tongan. My parents immigrated here. My wife, she's full Tongan, yet I was born in Hawaii, and Western and educated and raised in this Western world, if you will, which clearly there's values and it's a wonderful thing. But I really appreciated what Dr. Gancinia was talking about, and I think all of you can relate to this, that sometimes the Westernized paradigm in education at times it seems in conflict with our Pacific values and way of living. I clearly, like I said, I'm humbled because I'm excited to be part of this and hopefully continue to be more involved, because as Dr. Conklin said, is that I do, although I'm full Tongan and look so Polynesian, I do feel very Westernized and feel even disconnected from my Polynesian ways, if you will. I mean, a funny thing, my wife, she's very Tongan, speaks to fluent Tongan, but when her and we met at BYU, when we wanted to get married, her parents didn't want her to marry, even though I was a returned missionary, going to school, all of this, but yet I was not Tongan enough, I was Fia Palagi, if you will. And of course, that changed when I graduated from medical school. Then it changed. They accepted me. I'm just kidding. but it's a real issue though that I'm talking about, is that I almost feel disconnected somewhat to our Polynesian ways. But as I was perusing some of those questions that Aluti sent us, honestly, I only looked at it. I think he just sent it to us yesterday or so, so I didn't really have that much to ponder. But it further, perusing the questions further, in some ways made me feel even more disconnected. Especially, there was a particular question about what heritage practices do I intentionally integrate into my practice? What I do as a doctor, what I do as a psychiatrist. And at first, like I said, I felt about this big because I just thought, wow, what is it that I do? What is it that I do? Because I feel like I'm a good doctor. I feel like I'm a good physician, and I do right for my patients and try to do my best. But at first I felt very inadequate, like there is not much of my Pasifika connection in terms of what I do. But as I thought about it more today and realized that I think the things that make me a good physician or to connect with people are not things I learned during my undergraduate, are not things I learned in medical school, or not things I learned in residency, but actually are from my Pasifika background and traditions. That even though I'm not fluent in Tongan, I firmly believe that many of our Pasifika principles and healing practices I have learned. And let me just give you an example so that I can make it more tangible for all of you. But as I was thinking about, like, what are the things that I learned from my culture? And I think this is, these things I'm addressing are not unique to Polynesians. I mean, they're kind of broad topics, but I thought of respect. I thought of service. I thought of ofa, love, spirit of aloha. I thought of like not sweating the small stuff. And anyway, like let's go to respect, for instance. As in the Tongan culture, we never walk in front of someone, and you pass through tolo, excuse me. When you're talking to your aunties and uncles, you're taught at a very young age. You never, if you're standing and they're sitting, you better go under their eye line and talk to them, and there's that sense of respect for elderly and others, not just elderly, but all people. And what I realized is that comes from as a physician. And, in the westernized education, we talk about one of the things that is probably paramount in terms of healing as a psychiatrist, and I'm sure as a psychologist, as any kind of therapist, is having this therapeutic alliance. That's the Western words that we use, is that because I know for the psychotropic medications that I prescribe, they found that one of the number one predictors of whether someone's going to comply with the medications that you prescribe is, do you have a therapeutic alliance with the patient? Do they trust you? Do they value you? Do they have this connection? That's a positive predictor whether they're going to take medicines or not. And anyway, I know I'm kind of rambling, but the point I'm making is that I truly believe that principle of therapeutic alliance is what I've learned from my Tongan culture, from our Polynesian culture. In the 20 years I practiced medicine, it's funny, I'll meet the patient. Once again, I don't look like an MD, so I think that's why probably they don't know, but often I go in and I meet with the patient and we talk, and then I begin to talk about treatment, what I recommend. And I can't tell how many times the patient has said, "Oh, you're the doctor? You're the doctor?" Like they were talking to me this whole time and didn't realize that I was the doctor. And once again, my point in that is that I think our culture has taught us to respect others, to not put ourselves above others, to meet people where they're at, to have that connection, to have that relationship. And it's those kinds of things that I've learned from being from Tongan ethnicity, from our Polynesian culture. That I once again, I'm so grateful for my westernized education, but what I'm realizing now is that they've simply articulated and put words to the very values and principles that we're taught. Another thing, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but one of the things, someone talked about the high suicide rate for physicians, and that's a reality. It's a reality for very higher educated people. And I know for physicians, once again, the suicide rate is high, and this is my extrapolation of why, is that once again, many of us in higher education, all of you that are listening to this, we're used to being problem solvers, being leaders, to help, to be in that position, and to then ask for help, to be vulnerable is something that we're not used to or don't want to do, or maybe even prideful. And so we don't reach out to ask for help. But what I have to say, and then also we're involved in very stressful work and everything, but I'm grateful for my Polynesian heritage in that I don't sweat the small stuff. I think that's been a positive predictor for me in navigating this 12 years of education to become a psychiatrist. I think honestly, one of the values that I appreciate about us Polynesians is that we're very in the moment, that we only think about like what's in front of us. There's pros and bads to that, but the good thing for me is that had someone told me to be a psychiatrist, it's going to take 12 years, I would have never done it. Honestly, for me, it was like, okay, I got to get a degree. And then I got my degree. When I was at BYU, the 4-year degree took me 6 years. I was on the 6-year plan. But then even after I got my degree, I started working as a social worker. And then it was only then I realized I wanted to go to medical school. And then I took the prereqs, got into med school. And then when I was in medical school, honestly, I really had no idea that 4 more years, and then there's residency after that, another 4 years. But anyway, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for my Polynesian heritage, and I think we do belong to a culture that doesn't sweat the small stuff. And I think that's something that we shouldn't lose, try not to lose as we advance in this higher level of education, as our lives become more stressful, is that there are clearly, and then the relationships that we talked about. I'm so grateful for our relationships, our family relationships. And, but anyway, I think I'm just blabbering right now, but I'm more interested in if there's specific questions, or we can address some of the other questions that Luthi sent us. But anyway, I'm grateful to be a part of this, everyone, and hopefully I can have something substantive to share with all of you. Luthi, it's yours now.
Hey, thank you guys so much. On behalf of Pasifika in medicine, and just on behalf of everyone here, we just want to thank you three. Thank you three for your words and for your wisdom. As a future doctor, I'm one of the only Polynesians in my school. There's only a couple more, but they're a year ahead of me, and there's another Polynesian student that's 2 years ahead of me. So there's 3 in a school of 600. It's kind of hard, to keep rooted, I guess, sometimes when you don't really see your people there at school with you. But listening to you guys' words and kind of just learning lessons about the importance of remembering who I am as a Polynesian, I think that will propel me, and I definitely am grateful for you guys' lessons. And I believe I speak on behalf of everyone here. So thank you guys for your wisdom and everything. I do want to open up the floor to have all you guys just unmuted, and anyone who would like to ask any questions, please feel free. During this time, we want to say free, open question and answer kind of section. But to kind of start it off, I wanted to ask a question. As people start to think about things they might want to ask you. But I think everyone here, we're all busy. Whether it's with school or whether it's with work or with family things. When you guys were in, getting to become doctors in your fields, how did you guys handle that stress in regards to medical school or to psychology in getting your PhDs? How did you guys handle that, all that, and balance everything? And what were certain things that you guys were able to do to keep your mental health, a priority and stay afloat personally in your own lives? And I'll just kind of leave it up to whoever wants to answer or whoever wants to go first.
I guess I'll go since I'm the rookie here, being that I just graduated. Dr. Conklin, I saw that you unmuted, so I'll be short with my going through all of that. I kind of laughed that Dr. Kini said it took that long amount of time, and similar for me, it took 13 years for my whole process to kind of get where I'm at right now. And I'm not even done, right? In the sense of I still need to get licensed and pass the EPPP. But to your question, Luti, how do you maintain balance? I just want to put this out there that I don't think it's even possible to be completely balanced. That is impossible. And for us to acknowledge that that's a superhuman thing to do, it's a robotic thing to do. None of us can meet that standard ever. But what I will say was helpful for me is rooting myself in community, finding spaces that connected me to my people, our language, the music. Having that space is very important, and being intentional about the time that I spent, because I'm the kind of person who like to say yes to all kinds of stuff. And I had to realize to say no, because I was raised to respect and to be helpful. And at the same time, if I did that, then everybody would have a part of me and I would have nothing left. And so those are the kind of the short answers to that. And I'll yield to the others.
I just wanted to acknowledge too that my training as a psychologist, going through getting my PhD is a very different journey from that of many others who may be on this call, if you're in medical school and so forth. And I actually, when I received a text from Luti that had some of the questions that people had posted, I had no idea that suicide rates were higher among physicians compared to the general population. And when I hear that question about how do I balance, I don't know why those rates are as they are, but from what I have heard and understand about folks who are going through residency, going to medical school, going through medical school, is I hear how common it is to work 20+ hour shifts, to work to a point of like exhaustion, and also not just working, so hard, but also working in the trenches. Like you're working with our most vulnerable communities, people who are at sometimes the worst places that they've been in their lives, where it is a matter of life and death. And so carrying that, is hard for me to even fathom. And so I guess I want to acknowledge that. And when you'd asked about balance, and I was reflecting a little bit on my journey, toward completing my PhD. And one memory that comes to mind, I was on internship and I was doing my pre-doctoral internship at the University of Utah. And my wife and I, we lived in the family student housing there. And it was a 2-bedroom apartment, the old cinder block ones, if you're up that way, built like a bunker, and I would work after work, probably about 3-4 hours in one bedroom, trying to finish up my dissertation. And I had a tight timeline because my chair was going to be going on sabbatical for a year. So I knew I started my internship August. I knew by December I had to have it finished. And so I'd be in that room working until 1 a.m. on my writing, and there was one evening, I was kind of at the tail end, and I sent it out to my committee. And as soon as I hit send, I literally felt my eyes get heavy. Like I felt like I was just relieved, and only for the first time noticed how exhausted I felt. And then almost moments later, I had this second thought of like, man, this never ends, does it? Like, I just submitted this and felt so relieved, but then I thought, well, once I pass my dissertation, then it's still finding a job, and then it's still getting licensed, and then it's still, you know, one thing after the next thing. And for me, it was kind of an important reminder of how important it is also to celebrate those victories along the way. Like those little victories along the way are so important, and certainly to savor those. And certainly, I appreciate what Bongo said, which is that you know, sometimes it's hard to feel that balance. Sometimes we're just really pressed and we do what we can. Sometimes we feel like we got barely enough in the tank, and then when we're done, we notice, oh man, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm feeling exhausted now. But anyways, those were just kind of some general thoughts and reactions. But the importance of savoring those little victories, kind of when they come. It's hard work, and thank you all for kind of what you're doing. I know that it's a hard journey that you all are on.
I think my 2 cents though, add, I think most everybody involved in this call are either in some, whether it's med school or some undergraduate or graduate program. So all of you guys are right in the thick of it, and I think can relate to the struggles of balancing and you know, sometimes, you know, with our Pasifika connections, or it is difficult. There's real realities there. Like for my wife and I, in our experience, I'm the youngest in my family, youngest of 7. So my older siblings were all kind of growing up and doing their own thing and somewhat self-sufficient. But my wife, she's the oldest in her family. And as you all know, the oldest daughter in a Tongan family is the fahu. And she's almost a parental figure. And my wife is also a lot older than a lot of her siblings. So when we were graduating from college and started working, you know, and then also being the first college graduates, there was a lot of expectations on what we were supposed to do to support. And all of us know, I mean, when there's a funeral, you know, you get the call from mom, hey, I need some money to send to this funeral, or whatever it might be, or wedding or eating. And of course, we always did whatever we could. But when we were in med school, obviously that's when I couldn't work anymore. And one of the things that my in-laws couldn't understand was that I had to quit my job. I had a pretty decent job prior to med school, but then I told them, well, I can't, you know, because in med school, if you work outside of school, I mean, you're going to fail unless, it's just too rigorous. And I think PhD programs and many other graduate programs are like that. But as we were trying to navigate that, and, you know, once again, we're just trying to survive. We're poor college students with children, but yet the demands of giving at a wedding or giving at a funeral were still very difficult. And so that in that 4-year period, I sat down with my wife and I just said, hon, we just can't, you know, I want to, but we can't. And what the moral of this story is that we had to set boundaries. And it was a hard thing, because just like Dr. Gancinia said, I mean, I don't want to be that guy saying no, you know, I want to help and do my part. But through med school and even residency, I had to sit down with my in-laws and just tell them, you know, what you guys could do to help us is just don't ask for anything. We're not even asking for support. We're just asking, if you don't ask us for anything, that would help us. And even though I'm saying it like that, they babysat. Honestly, it took a village to educate a Tongan MD. I mean, it would not have happened without them. And so that's another part of that question, is that I'm grateful for the relationships. And even though there wasn't anybody that had any monetary help, they clearly helped with me and my wife having our 8 children and navigating med school and all that. So setting boundaries was a big thing. But believe me, the moment that we could not have that rule, as far as telling them we could help more, they knew it and they saw it. But that's why now, you know, if my in-laws ask for anything, no brainer, it's there. I mean, if I have it, I give, you know, and we do. But to navigate it during that time frame, we just had to set hard limits. And honestly, even through those years, they didn't get it. They just thought I was a deadbeat guy, and who knows, maybe they still think I'm a deadbeat. but setting limits was necessary. And then also just being in the moment. I kind of addressed it. I think one of the wonderful things about us Polynesians is that we savor and enjoy the moment. You know, sometimes we don't think about tomorrow, even though sometimes we should think about tomorrow more. But you know, when I got time off, just valuing the time with my family and relationships, and hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Kikini. I put it in the chat, but I do want to just open it up to anyone who would like to unmute or just put questions in the chats for any of these doctors and anything that they can address or any questions that you're curious about for them. So the floor is your guys's. DC, are people able to unmute?
Yeah, they should be able to unmute. If anybody's having a problem, feel free to let us know in the chat. And I personally had a question, so feel free to answer both. Shannon Bell, were you about to ask a question?
That's all right, you go through it.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have you next. My question was, and feel free to answer like one or the other, just because we have 2 audiences here. For medical students, us in Pacificas in medicine and other Pacifica students may have a good idea of how to, you know, the kind of the mental health issues that our community may be facing, but a big part of our role as well as doctors is also to educate our colleagues and our other medical students on how they can best approach mental health discussions with their patients as well. And this is a discussion that's come up with some of my fellow medical students at Case Western. And so my question for that would be, what recommendations would you have for, you know, a medical student who doesn't have the background of as a Pacifica student in approaching mental health issues with patients? And then Dr. Kinikini had mentioned for students that aren't in medical school currently, you had mentioned setting some boundaries and talking to your family. That can be a difficult thing to bring up to your family. It can be viewed as my concern in the past with that has been feeling like I'm selfish in bringing up those kinds of discussions. Do you have any recommendations on how you would bring that up in particular? So feel free to answer one or the other, but those are the questions that kind of came up as I was listening.
DC, I'll address the second question just because it's kind of a piggyback of what I was talking about before, the setting boundaries. You're exactly right. That's a real issue. And honestly, it was painful. I mean, there's no easy word around it. I mean, we were perceived as being selfish. And once again, like I said, I joked around about it, but, you know, my in-laws didn't want my wife to marry me because they felt I was too westernized, you know, and too focused on myself, if you will. But I think we consciously went into it just recognizing, just saying, hun, you know, we know our goal, we know our plan, and I think most of us, Pacifica in medicine, the goal is that you're going to educate yourself so that you can help your family and friends and community, and we just, that's what we communicated to them, even though they didn't understand. I mean, honestly, my in-laws were very upset that why couldn't we help and participate in a way that some of my wife's other siblings were. And it was a hard thing, but it's just, and I think all of you can relate, it's all part of, achieving something of value. A lot of people aren't going to understand what you're doing, what you're trying to do. But I think if now you talk to my in-laws and everything, because I'm so grateful for the help that they did give us, because fortunately, we did our undergraduate in Utah, where my wife's family was, a lot of my family was, and then I did medical school there. Didn't do residency there, but the 4 years of med school, 4 years of college, 4 years of med school was all in Utah. So we had a lot of relationships and a lot of help. And so, yeah, I mean, essentially I'm saying there was no easy answer. We had to swallow that bitter pill. They had to swallow that bitter pill. But honestly, I think now, we're blessed. I'm in a position, when my mother-in-law, she needs anything, she calls, and I, I happily oblige. And I'm grateful that we're in a situation that we can help where we can. And there's no easy answer. I think it's just one of the difficult things that all of you, it sounds like you've already experienced that, DC, already, and you're going to continue to, especially since you got residency still even coming up. But anyway, that's that.
Thank you.
I'll try to go ahead and tackle the first question, TC, that you talked about. What advice would you give to somebody who has never really who is navigating mental health discussions, if I'm remembering correctly? I don't know if it was mentioned in my introduction or if I mentioned this really, but a big part of my research actually has to do with help-seeking stigma. In other words, what gets in the way in terms of mental health and reaching out. And one of the things that I found in my study is that the importance of building a relationship with the client. I think I'm echoing in some words what Dr. Kinikini said, of med compliance is only as good as the relationship, right? That's a predicting factor. And so if I can kind of impose one piece of advice, is that when discussing mental health with Pacifica peoples, it's important to get that relationship in check in there, and that there's going to be a power differential. And what I mean by the power differential, for those who are not familiar with that kind of that framework, is that a lot of times they will see us as professionals being in a power higher than them in some ways. And we've learned that when you can deconstruct that and actually go to a more personal level with people of Pacifica descent, they feel more connected. And part of that really comes from, and I know that some of y'all might cringe, right, because of the Western training, it actually comes from self-disclosure of, oh yeah, when I went, when my doctor said if I don't control my diet, I had to go on metformin too, and I was pretty upset, right? That disclosure right there, I see smiles already kind of happening, right? Of that, well, it feels relatable, right? Disclosure is a big piece. Humor can be an interesting part of connecting. And to the Western eyes, it may seem unprofessional, but to the Pacifica connection, it may feel even more drawn in, because we feel like this is a person who knows me and recognizes me, right? And autonomy is a big piece, or recognizing that these individuals and acknowledging their choice in all this process. We cannot force anyone to engage in any treatment. And so recognizing that, right, and acknowledging and naming that is an important piece. And unspoken, based on kind of the conversation earlier, to acknowledge is that not only are they dealing with their own mental health, but they're holding this whole structure of family that can be a part of this process as well, that may have stigma too. They may feel like, okay, I can go do it, but the family may feel some shame related to them reaching out for mental health. And so I don't think that's all inclusive list, but those are pieces that I think may be important, TC, to have the conversation around when starting to have contact related to mental health, just as a starter.
Thank you.
I don't have a great deal to add to kind of what's been said already. I was just thinking about, and in the first question you'd asked about if someone who's not of Pasifika background was working with a Pasifika family, if I remember that right, and kind of what sort of advice one might give. And I was just thinking sort of generally, and we'll all find ourselves in situations where we're working with people of backgrounds that we don't identify with or don't relate to, and I think it's so important, kind of what has been mentioned about creating a relationship, and a lot of that can be facilitated through our own disclosure and sort of vulnerability. I also think too, and reflecting on some of my training, is that a lot of my training was kind of through this Western lens, and there's sort of this message that you be a blank slate, right? And you don't kind of include much of yourself in that process, and that doesn't work really well with our Pasifika peoples and for nurturing much of a relationship. But I suppose if I were to offer any advice or encouragement, I see these as opportunities to kind of be proximate and to learn and to grow, and so that we want to approach that with respect and humility, and yeah, that's just kind of a general thought reaction. And I want to say kia ora to Shannon too. We're able to kind of whanonga a little bit in the private chat and learn we got some of the same roots. But yeah, nice to meet you, brother.
Thank you.
Tēnā koe. If I'm allowed to, I might ask my question now, if I don't take over anybody. But firstly, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ngāpuhi hau, ko no toki mana wharua te waka ko nuku tāwhiri te ariki, hoki, ko wakare te awa, ko wakare te marae, ko Irish, tōku iwi hoki, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. Firstly, I really just want to say actually that thank you to, or we have the saying in Māori, and it's kind of a bit of a chiefly status, that of rangatira. And so just tēnā koe to you, bro, Luti, because the definition of a rangatira is the gathering of peoples together to have kōrero, to be enlightened in our cultural way. So tēnā koe to you, bro. I am located and situated actually here in Poipiripi, or what is known as Victoria, Australia. And so we pay our respects to our brothers and sisters of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And we understand actually some of the struggles and stuff, or the current day struggles of being disconnected, or rather the colonial effects and the struggles that they're facing today. So we stand in support with them and in direct relationship with them. With an Aboriginal elder once told me that a kangaroo, as we're known for, the skips, with my Aussie accent, the kangaroo is one of those that cannot move backwards but can only move forwards. But without his tail, can actually not stand up. His tail provides balance, and it is one of those things that they use as a metaphor to actually understanding. You need to understand where you've come from. You need to, and that will hold you in a good stead. So the kangaroo can go to the speeds of up to Over here, it's in kilometers. It can go up to about 60 kilometers per hour, and cannot do any of that, and does not know which direction he's going without his tail. So for us that have grown up in this space, have felt some of that disconnect, that tail is really strong for us in that. So I just wanted to kind of recognize those as well. And then secondly, I just wanted to acknowledge also, Bungward, your greeting as well, because it is very, it's part of that conversation that we're having over here. I'm a youth worker. I do a lot of work in the mental health and young people space more specifically. And so it's a privilege to be a part of this conversation, but it was a privilege to be able to hear those struggles and stuff in and amongst that as well. So that's a bit of my corridor in and amongst that. But I guess my conversation, or my path or my question was more so, how do you navigate kind of influencing some of these structural ways of kind of being and seeing and doing with a cohort of people that don't necessarily value that tail, as I was talking about, as important? Because and don't get me wrong, there's some really great been some really great people that I've learned my formal teachings off. They have really kind of showed me some of those similar values that we've had, and one of those in particular gave me a really nice quote, which was his understanding of compassion was the unconditional desire to know oneself and the other. And so I just wondered how you might go about that, and how you kind of navigate that in your practice, in your world, in what is both medicine, psychology, mental health, all seems to be very head related, and as a lot of our cultural aspects are also heart related. Kia ora. Oh, that's to anybody, by the way.
I'll take a stab at this, and I want to name that it's hard, what you're asking. That to incite structural change in the process is an uphill battle, especially in the spaces where we don't have the power or the influence that we're wanting. What I will say in my process of pushing against, so to speak, the system, there's going to be times where you're going to feel your kupuna to tell you to speak up. And one of which I can recall in my training program, we sat in this meeting, and actually Dr. Coughlin was there, and the director was saying, "Thank you everybody for doing such a wonderful job with this crisis that was going on." And I was thinking to myself, this don't feel right. This doesn't feel pono. And I stood up in the meeting. I said, I want to let you know that my ancestors are not happy, because what you're talking about only serves the general population. It does not serve our people, nor does it support our cultural practices in terms of healing. And so there's times that you need to speak up when you're prompted. There are times when you need to build relationships with people of power. And I'm grateful for that chance, right? And one thing that our culture teaches us well is to know where that power system lies, right? We know in the room in terms of who is the oldest, who holds status, right? And we can use that cultural skill to be able to navigate these systems and influence them through proximity. In some ways, I invite each of us to kind of think of how the research literature actually supports what we're doing. If we can speak their language and say, colonization has been part of the trouble of mental health, and yet we're adapting colonized ideas in the space. Are we imposing colonization and going against the literature? right? We can speak their own language using their own research in that and say, what about using indigenous practice, indigenous ways to reconnect them and help them to realize and recognize those healing properties that come from those. And so those are some face value thoughts and about that I'm kind of feeling, but I think it's important to speak up when you feel. And I'll tell you that after I said it, I kind of looked at Dr. Conklin in that space and I was like, I wonder if I'm going to get kicked out of the program for telling this director what's up. But Brother Man said to me, thank you. And I thought to myself, I could feel my tutu nakaniluha pushing me to say, no, we're not happy. And I was like, okay, you protected me and I did my job. Now help me, because all of a sudden I was volunteered to lead this initiative now because I called them out. I called them out in this and said, this is not right. And so it's important to speak up, to use your leo, your voice, because when you speak with the power of your ancestors. I know that. So don't be afraid, because they're in our bones and we are their connection. So just that, brother.
Kia ora, tēnā koe.
I just wanted to say thank you, Shannon, for that question too, just how it's pushing me to kind of think on this and just reflect on the systems that I'm in and what role do I have in kind of pushing back against some of these things, you know, and I guess just kind of resonating what's been said, but this can be a hard thing, sometimes a really vulnerable thing. It's something that I think can take a lot of courage to, you know, speak up, advocate, kind of, and in particular, I was thinking particularly in situations where we might feel like we're kind of on our own a little bit. I really appreciate what Dr. Gansenia mentioned in this particular instance, and I remember the specific conversation that he's talking about, and I don't think I heard that from you, Bongo, but in that moment, the vulnerability that it would have taken to kind of speak up as you did in that instance, and I remember not just him speaking, but felt all of what he'd said and everything behind what he had said. I was just thinking a little bit about things like aloha, you know, and I think sometimes people think of aloha as like being passive and like, you know, it's kind and respectful, but it's definitely not. Well, then you can kind of tread on me and kind of. I'm just thinking about the fight that is going on Mauna Kea and how they can advocate for the Mauna there, for the Aina and for their ancestors, and in a way that still maintains aloha. And how important it has been to enlist the help of others. But those are just some general thoughts, reactions, and I want to thank you for the question because it's helping me to kind of lean in myself.
Yeah, and I wanted to echo that too. Shannon, thanks for that question. Honestly, I mean, it's humbling, I think, and it's an excellent question. And just like Dr. Conklin's saying, it's just reiterating or just reinforcing to me that I want to do more and be more, and that I think our heritage, that they are clearly assets, and that we can create change in a good way. I think the one thing that maybe I would say is that, I mean, the very thing that we're participating on, the very fact that DC and Luti and many of the others, I mean, these are future doctors and psychologists and educated people. Just the representation alone is part, I think, is part of the grassroots effort that is essentially going to culminate to where we can do some great change. I know in my own experience, like I said, even though I do feel disconnected from my heritage, I hope, I mean, I want to make it so clear that I think everything that makes me a good doctor comes from my upbringing, being Polynesian. And a direct example of this, Luthi will soon know what I'm talking about. At the University of Utah School of Medicine, prior to graduation, it's an award. It's called the Golden Cane Award, and it's voted by the 100. There's 100 in our class, and it's an award that's voted by the students, your 100 classmates, of who the Golden Cane Award should go to at the end of graduation. And the Golden Cane Award is, just to summarize it, it's supposedly the individual that you feel best epitomizes what a healer, what a physician should be like, what should be a prime example of someone who essentially a great physician who treats the patients and cares well the best. And it's voted by the 100. Well, like I said, I mean, I'm going to be kind of vulnerable here. Yeah, you know, I was just happy to graduate from med school. I mean, I felt like, I mean, it was so difficult for me. I'm not a very good test taker. I thought I was smart until I got into med school. And then all of a sudden I'm surrounded by really smart people. And then I realized, wow, I'm not really that smart. And so I struggled, and I was open about how much I struggled. And I mean, I clearly was probably on the lower end of scores and everything. And everybody knew that. Everybody knew this. But when it came to the Golden Cane Award, my classmates voted me, even though they knew, I mean, in terms of test scores and all those other quantifiable variables, I was probably the last in the class. But when my classmates were asked to vote on who epitomizes what a healer should be like, I was the one voted. And I bring that up not to prop myself up, but to tell you that that vote came from our heritage, came from the things that I learned, not in medical school, but how to treat people, the spirit of aloha, the ofa, how we love people, how we respect people. I truly believe, once again, that came from my Tongan heritage. And so the point of this rambling is that I think that's how we create structural change. The fact that there's going to be more of us physicians, more of us in these positions, and we'll be connected, we'll have access to people in power that can make the change. And I think we're all kind of part of it. Anyway, that's enough rambling for me. Hopefully that made sense, guys.
No, thank you. That was really awesome. It just reminded me. I had a thought. It just reminded me of recently I was kind of enlightened to the word of actual education and the Latin meanings of it being having two, and one is educare, one is educare, and that both of those meanings, one is to draw out and then one is to mold. And I when I was listening to that, I hear that within both the education system as in terms of gaining some skills, which is often the things that, you know, the place that we want to be, but not often I appreciate that understanding of it just because it actually brings our tail with us. And so, yeah, I very much appreciated listening to the fact that, you know, the struggle is also real from a kind of more ground worker, but that, you know, that you know, there is I guess hope in terms of those of us that are kind of entering the space, and I think that's the powerful thing that we actually have to offer others entering into that space. Is what is different about us, and unique on a strength-based way, as opposed to potentially being seen as always being different from a negative light, and from a negative media social kind of point of view. Kia ora.
So there's a question in the chat. Are there any, Malo, from Jerry, are there any examples of holistic Pasifika programs that have been successful in prisons that I could read about?
I'll have to research that one, guys. Yeah, I'm not, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any.
I don't know if it's written, but maybe about a year ago, I ran into a video that was done about the work that Kumuhina is actually doing in some of the prison systems, where Kumu goes in and invites those who are in that space to engage in oli or chants, and to talk about the meaning behind those chants, and to really re-educate and decolonize a lot of their thinking and their action. It was quite powerful. I'm not sure if that is written about, and maybe you can find it, maybe typing Kumuhina prison, and I don't, being so long ago, I don't know if I can necessarily find a link for that, but Kumuhina in prison.
Looks like Hoku just dropped a link. Sorry, Hoku, go ahead and talk.
Oh no, yeah, I just dropped a link there. So there's a Maori man who's worked in the prison system for many years, and this link, it looks like it has information about different seminars that they offer. I haven't looked very closely, but maybe different literature that you can access. But yeah, he's someone that I'm familiar with, and whose work I highly respect.
And then another question in the chat for any of our speakers: are there any cultural ceremonies or practices that you use in order to take care of your mental health that you would recommend to others?
I feel like I always go first, but I guess I'll just go again then. Just this morning on my drive in, what I love to do in the mornings is to do my chants. I call, I oli. I think that's very powerful to repeat those words and to recognize. And so that's one thing I specifically do on a consistent basis. I walk barefoot. It might sound like it's like nothing, but to really connect with this dry place that I'm at and to recognize where I am, I definitely do that. And I think an important piece is I turn to my living kupuna who are here and elders and try to keep asking questions. That's been a powerful piece for me to maintain connection and practice in that regard.
I think for me, the only cultural practice that I developed, or at least improved on, of course, music. Us Polynesians love to sing and play and things like that. And I would have to say, through medical school and residency, my ukulele skills became very good, because that was my coping mechanism, and so, yeah, I really, whenever I had free time or when I needed a study break, I would play my uke, and that helped with my own mental wellness, definitely. But yeah, I'm trying to think of other things.
Yeah, if I were to add, I'd say that probably a lot of those for me are faith-based. But there's been, for me, especially lately, kind of taking care of my body has been something that's been really important. And so there's like a touch rugby group that I'll kind of get together with, and that's it's nice because a lot of the people I run with are also Polynesians for the most part, and so I get to kind of connect with the culture that way, but also just do something that helps the body feel good. Yeah.
Any last questions before we thank the speakers and just give a close to this conference?
if nobody else has any, I'm going to just ask one while I can, because it's not too often we get this kind of opportunity. Just in terms of how do you navigate, often from a Western lens, they place a Pasifika group, kind of, you're those, you're part of that mob, and there's a lot of commonalities, but there's a lot of nuances too, and we I guess are facing those with the variety of different experiences of some of our kind of young people that are kind of struggling with their identity. And so on part, I will identify with one community more specifically, maybe than another, depending on the context in which they go through. But if you're kind of walking into a Western white also context, then it's something altogether, so if I'm going into a Pacifica context, I'm Maori. If I go into a kind of a white context, I'm Pasifika, as opposed to this a range of kind of overarching things. How do you guys manage that in amongst that clinical space, or the what is so compartmentalized in one sense, but then it's so there are a range of assumptions on another?
I was just thinking, and I've come to think of this as a bit of a skill, but I think if you kind of have those backgrounds and kind of interact in or operate in these different contexts, is that we kind of learn to code switch a little bit, and I really think it's a skill. I think of it as being adaptive, and I also recall just my own personal experience with that sometimes it was a bit hard for me, because in some ways it might feel like it's not authentic, but in many ways I believe it is. We just learn to kind of adapt and engage in different spaces, and that's a great skill.
I don't know if this really answers your question, Shannon, but the one thing that came to my mind as you were talking, I always have to remind myself that these labels that are given to us are colonized labels, right? And it's okay if we use them. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I think it's important for us to keep in mind that that's not what our people were called, right? And that unfortunately it's part of that process when there isn't representation in terms of professionals and even in the literature. And I think that's a task for each of us in these spaces to be able to continue writing, continue working towards bringing light and shedding light to those differences. Because yes, although we are homogenized, there are so many nuanced differences, right? My word for ocean is the word for something profane in another language, right? And so I think it's important to name that even linguistically, even if we're Austronesian based on anthropological research, our time apart in many ways and our context has really developed, our cultures have developed differently, and that's okay.
So AS put a good question in our chat, and they said, how do we best care for our children's mental health when facing such a challenge as lockdowns with extensive restrictions with little to no socialization and no extended family presence?
This is a phenomenal question, and I fail to recognize this. I am a father of 3 kiddos, 9, 6, and 1.5, and I'm in the thick of all of this. It is not easy. when even the look of the sibling creates the wrath of another sibling because they've been in lockdown. And so I want to name who I have empathy for that. I have sympathy for that. And something that I try to do every night with my kiddos, no matter how late I get home, I like to sit at their bedside and I like to give them one-on-one time. And I don't ask them how you feel, because that question, there's a lot of stigma behind that. I ask my kiddos, what made you feel like you wanted to help somebody today? What made you laugh? And what made you feel like you wanted to ask for help or maybe cry? And having those moments with my 3 kiddos has been very enriching. And one-on-one time, even if we cannot get the extended family time, is just as important and just as healing. And the connection is very important. Before I leave for work, I honey my kids, forehead to forehead, nose to nose. We breathe. We sit together. At dinner, I put my phone away. As exciting it is to play Mario Kart on my phone now for free, whew, I gotta put that bug aside and be like, no, be with my family, right? And it doesn't answer all the questions, but I think it's important that when they cannot have pilina or connection with their ohana, with their family, that they can have pilina and connection with you as their caregiver, and let them know that it's okay to feel sad, it's okay. And I've disclosed to my kids, even if daddy is a therapist, daddy cries of how much it feels so hard to put a mask on when going to Costco. I already have asthma. I don't want to put another thing on my face, but I do it. And so just owning that, holding space with them and crying when you feel sad with them. Hiding it does nothing for them, but tells them that it's not acceptable. So I come from that philosophy that our kupuna cried and they wailed. It's okay for me to cry. And so maybe those things can be helpful, but I don't think it solves every problem. But I have empathy because those 3, it's a war zone when I come home. Really though, Nerf bullets, all of the above. And so I hope that helps.
Bongo, that was awesome. That's perfect. I think the only thing I could add is I would give them Xanax, Klonopin, Valium. I'm just kidding. Once again, you're talking to a psychiatrist, so no,
Send them my way.
Bongo-
Send them my way.
But Bongo, awesome. No, that's wonderful. I think he answered that question wonderfully.
Lucy Otaki shared another good question that I wanted just to throw out there for you guys. How do you help someone who's struggling with acknowledging a mental health issue they may be experiencing?
I think I don't know. My experience has been once again, I think the psychologists are definitely more expert in dealing with this than myself. But clearly, just creating a safe place, being vulnerable. We've kind of talked about even self-disclosure, but I know for me and my patients, and even family members, people who finally confide in me and helping them acknowledge is that helping people realize that because and once again, I'm not saying anything that everybody already does. There's so much stigma around mental illness. There's so, especially in Pasifika, we perceive depression or anxiety as we equate that to weakness, to that if you're sad or you're depressed, that's a demonstration of how weak you are, that you're not strong enough. And so in terms of practical things, I mean, I whenever I'm talking to someone about depression and anxiety, I really try to normalize it and present it in a way that they know that I'm listening and it's non-judgmental. That and a lot of times I'll even give them, because a lot of times, sometimes by the time they come to a psychiatrist, and I know even as a psychologist, they're still in denial whether, you know, a lot of patients will be like, I'm here just because my mom wanted me to be here. I'm here. I don't feel like you need to be here or whatever. And I think this speaks to this question, and that is, I help people recognize that, hey, our brain, you know, all of us can easily put our heads around, oh, that your heart, you could have a problem with your heart. So you go see a cardiologist, you know, you have lung problems, you need to see a pulmonologist, or you break your leg, you got to see an orthopod, an orthopedic guy. You know, those things, they seem tangible to some, but when something goes on with our mind, our brain, whether it's depression or anxiety, for some reason, and it's not just Pasifika, it's all people, this is where the stigma comes from, is that they just cannot, there's a disconnect that we can comprehend other organ systems failing, but yet we can't comprehend our brain, the chemical imbalances, that the most complex organ can dysfunction. And so I always try to normalize that, hey, I mean, I really just give them that speech that I just gave you, is that, you know, just as other organ systems can malfunction, the brain being one of the most complex as the heart, that can have problems, and then as a result manifest in depression and anxiety. And so the medications that I use help to balance or correct those physiologic, pathologic deficiencies. And so anyway, just trying to normalize it. I mean, because once again, I think people they don't want to acknowledge that they have a mental health issue, because once again, even for them, it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of that they're weak, and just creating a safe space for them so that there's no judgment, and hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Dr. Kirikini. Thank you, Dr. Gansini and Dr. Conklin. If you guys have anything to answer for this question or anything else on your mind, please feel free. But is it okay if we share your guys' email address in case anybody wants to get in contact with you guys or reach out with more questions for you guys? Nice. Thank you, guys. Just on behalf of Pasifika in Medicine, thank you, guys. Thank you to everyone who came. I feel like we were able to have a really good crowd in here, and I think there was a lot of good lessons that I learned, and thank you. And I'm sure everyone learned. But thank you to you three. Thank you for giving your time and your energy and your mana to us and everyone that was able to show up. We will, end this conference, but just to everyone who came and anyone who was able to watch this recording, please know that we are here to help you in any way we can in regards to mental health or advice for anything. We're grateful for everyone that has come, and thank you for making this conference possible. So with that, we just want to give a big hug and a big appreciation to these speakers and send you guys on your way, and hope to see you guys all soon, very soon again. Thank you.
Luti, you guys are doing great work. Keep it up.
Thank you. Thanks, TC, Luti.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Mm-hmm.